CBT Nuggets JNCIS Security Series UTM Antivirus Protection. Well, this nugget is a part of a series. The last 4 nuggets of this JNCIS Security Series are really 4 parts of a single whole talking about unified threat management features. So in this nugget, the first of 4, we'll start out talking about UTM, what it is, the advantages of it, and then we'll actually go through the 4 features that are covered in the JNCIS security exam: antivirus, web filtering, content filtering, and finally, anti-spam filtering. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Well, let's dive in. Okay, before we define UTM or Unified Threat Management, let me just remind you of the fact that the IDP feature or the IPS feature that we looked at previously in this Nugget series, it's actually not a part of the UTM feature set. Okay, you may see that in documentation or articles, but really as far as Juniper is concerned, the UTM features and the IDP features are independent of each other. And so we will typically deploy these together in concert as separate components, as separate solutions, keeping in mind that the overhead on the SRX is going to be pretty beefy. Okay, as you can imagine, this is a feature set for application layer inspection. And even though IPS or IDP can inspect the application layer, this is a defense in-depth mechanism. It's another layer of defense. But as you can imagine, since we're doing application layer inspection, or in other words, layer 5 through 7 of the OSI model, that it's going to, demand some overhead on your device as far as processing cycles and other overhead. What is the goal of UTM in the feature set? We're going to decode traffic, and we're going to inspect traffic to stop traffic that's not allowed or is illegal or doesn't conform to protocol behavior or is just flat out malicious. Okay? Now, this feature is actually, at this point in time, only really supported on the branch SRX gateways, okay, not the higher end enterprise devices. And we get 4 main features. And that's what we're going to look at in this nugget and the 3 to follow as we finish up this Juniper JNCIS security series. The antivirus feature, the web filtering feature, the content filtering feature, and anti-spam. I think antivirus and anti-spam, we pretty much have a grasp on that. But if we look at web filtering and content filtering, think of it this way. Web filtering is a more granular HTTP and HTTPS filtering, as content filtering is a whole plethora of applications and services. Now, one of the components of the Juniper operating system that it makes this possible is the session manager. And the session manager allows applications to actually register their interest in a particular session and to do decoding and inspection. Now, once we analyze the traffic and we match some specific policy feature or policy action, for example, in a policy you have the then statement, okay? Well, then what can we do? Well, then we can drop the packet. Then we could notify the session manager to drop the entire session. Then we could close the session. Then we could send a TCP reset. And in some situations, we could even embed messages to send information back to the end user, okay? Some kind of warning, for example, update your antivirus, update your anti-spam, right on? So as we can see here, it's security policies that we're dealing with here, and it's security policies that actually associate the granular or particular traffic to the Unified Threat Management feature. Okay, well, that's UTM kind of in a nutshell. As we've already established, this particular nugget is going to focus on the antivirus feature of UTM, so let's take a look. Okay, in this nugget and for the JNCIS security exam, we're going to talk about 3 different types of UTM antivirus protection, but we're going to focus on one of these, okay? Now, we're going to focus on Juniper Express antivirus. This is a less intensive alternative to these other solutions. But let's talk about Kaspersky Full Antivirus Engine first. This is basically the most comprehensive option that we have to scan for viruses. The database has well over 500,000 records in its database. It's also has the ability to use heuristic techniques to detect polymorphic and metamorphic viruses. These are ones that constantly change their code, constantly move from disk to memory, and so on and so forth. They're hard to detect with pattern matching or regular expressions. Now, this is really flexible and very powerful, Kaspersky is. However, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of CPU cycles and is a pretty big performance hit. Now, you'd have to, if you're going to use this solution, of course, you have to download and install the latest antivirus engine and database, and hopefully your device would be able to support that. Probably not on the 210, even with the high memory solution. So perhaps maybe starting with the SRX 650. Now, the next one is the Sophos in the Cloud engine. And again, cloud computing is so ubiquitous now, and it's, just the phrase cloud is everywhere. This is the newest addition to the feature set. And this basically deals with our scalability problem, okay? Now, remember, one of the things about the Sophos in the Cloud engine is it's going to focus on HTTP-based traffic primarily. Now, we have to download some pattern files to our SRX that has some of the logic that the Sophos engine uses to compute file checksums and identify file types. However, we're still going to point to the cloud, okay? The virus database, the URL database, this is all stored on the Sophos servers, which is a major advantage. The database is stored outside the SRX. It's maintained away from the SRX, and so you can have a ton of signatures, and we aren't really bound by the resources or the memory specifically on the SRX. So the larger scale, the medium-sized business and up, those solutions would be the Kaspersky and Sophos options. Like I said, in this nugget, at this level, we're going to be focusing on the Juniper Express antivirus. Now, it is a full antivirus feature, and it does look at granular application layer traffic against a signature database. However, unlike the full antivirus version that you get from Kaspersky or the Sophos Cloud solution, it's not going to reconstruct the original application content. So it basically just sends streams of data packets to the scan engine. So let's talk about some of the more granularities here with Juniper Express Antivirus. And then, of course, we'll look at some of the configuration options. Now, one of the things that Juniper Express Antivirus has in common with Kaspersky and the Sophos in the Cloud engines is the fact that you have to have an additional license, a feature license. You have to pay for it and install it on your SRX. So that's something that they have in common. As a matter of fact, most of the features of the UTM demand an additional license you have to purchase. Now, there's a couple of exceptions, and we'll see them when we get to them. But as far as antivirus goes, you got to pay for it. Now, something else about Express Antivirus is you're going to get limited support. Okay, limited scanning support for file archives and compressed file formats. As far as compressed file formats, it only supports the scanning of gzip, deflate, and compressed. You also get limited support for decompression. You get certain decompression for HTTP and POP3 only. Also, the Express Antivirus will not support scanning by extension. In other words, it will not scan the file extensions. You have to get the Kaspersky or Sophos options to do that. Also, the scanning process will be interrupted during the time that the scanning database is loading. That's another limitation of the Express feature. Also, the antivirus could truncate certain warning messages. If the virus has been detected and the replacement message that's sent to you is longer than the original content it's replacing, it can be truncated. So you won't get the entire warning information. So again, there are some limitations. Now, like I said, this is a feature that you have to pay for. Now, do I want you to go out and pay for these feature licenses to prepare for this exam? Absolutely not. Okay, I didn't do it. It's an expense that I believe is a waste of money. if you are in a production environment and you can get your company to pay for it, or your own company, and you need it for production, then absolutely it's an expense you're going to want to incur, but not just to prepare for this exam or just to learn about these different features. Okay, truthfully, it's a waste of money. But let's take a look at where we would go in JWeb, for example, to look at our licensing features. Okay, like other Juniper operators and managers and administrators, I don't really like to use the JWeb to configure my devices. I've got J-series routers, EX switches, and I've got a couple of SRXs. I don't really like to use the JWeb, but one area I do like it is the maintain area. I like the maintain area because it's got the configuration management where you can upload configurations. It's got the software upload and install and downgrade. I like the graphical interface for this type of maintenance activity. And then, of course, the licenses area. So this is where I would probably use JWeb on a regular basis. Under licenses, by the way, you can see this SRX is pretty, plain vanilla out of the box. Again, I don't have any extra installed licenses on here. We know that IDP needs a license. I personally didn't want to spend the extra money. But you can see you have the feature licenses that are kind of come with the actual operating system, the dynamic VPN license, the wireless LAN AP license, and then here's where your installed licenses would be. So your IDP license, your UTM license, for example, the antivirus, you would go and you could add them here. Click on add and then put in the URL to your license file. It could be locally on this machine, for example. It could be on some other server in your organization where you keep all of your content, like all of your archived licenses and binaries. And then if you need your key, authentication key, you can input that there. A public key would be what you want to place in there and click on OK. So that's the licenses area. You want to make sure that you go and lay out your money at Juniper, get the licenses you need for the features you want to add on your SRX. Then you can install them on a local management station like the one that you're running the JWeb off of and just add them into the device or devices using the JWeb. Great way to do it. Okay, now the first question I have is, what is WELF? And the second question is, why do I have a picture of Worf from Star Trek Next Generation? I don't know. Whenever I hear the phrase WELF, I always think of Worf, like it's his cousin or something. I don't know. So that's why I got him there. WELF actually is important right now because it stands for Web Trends, well, that's weird, Enhanced Log File Format. And it's the Web Trends standard logging format, and it's used by UTM, okay? So it's composed of records. A record is a single line in a file. As you look at the records, the earliest records will be first, the most recent records will be last. You don't have any restrictions on the file names or any restrictions on log rotation policy. And down here you can see an example of a WELF log. So UTM supports the WELF standard. And some of the fields here are like the ID field. So that's the record identifier, which is firewall. We have the date and time in the time field. Pretty old date here. FW is the firewall IP address or the name. In this case, the address is 192.168.0.238. And PRI is the priority of the record. And you have different priorities, like syslog has different priorities. And you can see we're going to a Web Trends server here. As a matter of fact, you must save these WELF logging messages to a dedicated Web Trends server. I don't have a Web Trends server, but let's look at the configuration anyway, just in case they're going to try to pull this out on the exam. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, here's the configuration. And remember, you have to save these logging messages, these WELF messages, to a dedicated Web Trends server. Here we can see we're in configuration mode. We're going to set security log. So this is the source address of the security log. We're going to go ahead and use 1.2.3.4. Then we'll name our security log stream. In this case, we'll name it UTM-WELF. Then we want to set the format for the log messages. So we're going to set format WELF. And there's other options. For example, on my device, we'll go to Edit Security Log here and we'll say, let's go ahead and set the source address to, we'll do the same thing here, and we'll say it's going to be stream UTM WELF. And then the format, so to this particular server, we could send a binary log, we could do structured syslog, which is the newer recommended syslog format, traditional syslog, and then WELF. Okay, so we do have some options there. So while we're here, let's just go ahead and stay here and say we're going to do WELF, not self, but WELF. And let's say the category that we want to send, and we're going to do not all events, but just the content security, okay? And then we want to do like we would do with syslog, we want to do the severity levels. And we can see here we have the same type of severity levels that we have with syslog, right? So for example, I think in our syntax, we're going to do emergency, for example. And then you would want to follow up the severity of emergency with the IP address of the web trends host. So we'll say it's 5.6.7.8, for example. Or in my lab, it would be 192.168.2.20. Okay, so that's kind of the syntax there. So we can see that we've got our format of WELF, and then we have our category of content security, and then severity, critical, and emergency. So we're going to go ahead and put 2 there. We want to get all the critical and all the emergency. This works different than syslog, right? With syslog, if you choose a certain level, it's going to give you everything at that level and then more critical. Here, we're just getting the critical and emergency level logs. So it doesn't work the same as syslog in that regard. And then we can see here we're going to do to the host or the web trends server IP address 5.6.7.8. And then of course it'll be activated once you commit this. So again, on the exam and in a real world environment, you want to remember that UTM is all of the different features of UTM are going to be using this WELF logging service to a web trend, dedicated web trend server in your organization. Keep that in mind on the exam as well. Okay, with our Express antivirus configuration here, we're going to accomplish a couple of things. Now remember, in the branch environment, or the small office, remote office environment, we're going to move away from the Kaspersky antivirus engine or the Sophos engine, and we're going to offload some of these antivirus tasks to our endpoints, especially if you're in a branch office and you have, quite a few endpoints, and the overhead on the SRX is just basically too much. So what we can do is we can use the Express antivirus to have the SRX scan a subset of our full antivirus database, and we'll see that here in a moment how we're going to do that. For example, we'll look at things like HTTP, FTP, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. Now remember, on the SRX platform, if we're using hardware acceleration on, let's say, our SRX 210, for example, or 240 or 650, then whatever we match will be offloaded into hardware. Naturally, as we look at this configuration, it's not going to be all that much different than what we would see with the full Kaspersky engine, even though we can get a lot more granularities. So what we see first of all here is in the edit context, we want to set the pattern update and change it from the oops, got my wrong brush. Change the update to 120 minutes. The default is to update every 24 hours. So let's go ahead and update more often. It's always an excellent best practice, especially in a dynamic environment. Then we're going to enter the Edit Security Policies context. And you can see here we're basically dealing with our policy, okay? The from zone trust, the to zone untrust. Our policy is called UTM-AV, and we're matching any source address and any destination address. Then we're saying for this UTM-AV, we're going to match any application. Then, from the trust zone to the untrust zone, we will take our action. We will permit application services UTM policy, and here's what we're going to call our UTM policy, specifically EXP AV only. So basically, Express antivirus only. Now we need to configure our profile and our settings for that. So let's take a look at the next phase. Notice that right now we're in the Edit Security UTM context, and we've gone up and we've actually got our feature license and we paid for it and purchased it and uploaded it into our SRX, and now we can set the feature profile of antivirus and of type Juniper Express Engine, again, as opposed to Sophos or Kaspersky. Then we'll do the same command for the Juniper Express Engine, and we'll say the profile is going to be the Juniper Express profile, and then we're going to do a scan option here. Let's talk about no intelligent pre-screening. This is actually, if you're using Kaspersky or Sophos, you probably would be doing intelligent pre-screening. We're turning this off as our scan option because this is a computationally expensive process. And intelligent pre-screening will basically look at the first few packets of the file to see if there's any malicious code. And so we need to turn this feature off, intelligent pre-screening, on the Juniper Express engine because it's overhead that frankly our SRX 210 wouldn't be able to handle. Something else that we're not going to be able to scan option here in Express Antivirus is to do the by extension. So for example, we know that we cannot scan file extensions with the Express. So if it was Kaspersky, you would be using the Kaspersky by extension scan option. What we see now though are the granularities of our UTM policy EXP AV only. So we're going to issue this basic command set UTM-policy EXP AV only, the name of it, followed by the antivirus keyword. And then we're going to follow up with our different profiles. So for example, the first one we're going to do is we want to profile HTTP protocol with Juniper Express. We want to do our FTP upload and download profile for Juniper Express. We're also going to look at SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. Once we're done, just do a top commit. So what we're seeing here is we're kind of doing a granular subset of the entire scanning database by looking at HTTP, FTP uploads and downloads, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. If you're not using, for example, POP3 in your environment, then of course you could leave that one out. And so we're going to rely upon our end user end host antivirus to do things like scanning for file attachments and things like that, especially in an environment where we're not using the Sophos cloud solution or the full antivirus with Kaspersky. I want to talk about one more feature that's disabled by default that may come into play, and that is antivirus trickling. Realize that regardless of the solution you're using, whether it's Sophos or Kaspersky or the Express solution, the SRX is going to locally store the file content that's being scanned. Okay, they can be embedded or they can be actually downloaded. And this could be HTTP, it could be FTP, it could be part of an email attachment. Now we know that Express does not deal with the attachments, but again, you could be using something besides Express. And the SRX is going to proxy all the connections that are using UTM services. So what if that's to store a large file content when it's scanning? Well, if it's large FTP or HTTP or an attachment, it can be problematic. It can cause the client, the web browser, for example, to time out, or maybe you're using FileZilla FTP client, it can actually time out. So we want to prevent this from happening. So we do what's called antivirus trickling. What we're really doing is we're trickling or we're leaking some of the file content actually back to the client. So with HTTP trickling, for example, we're going to forward certain amounts of unscanned traffic back to the requesting client. That'll prevent the browser from timing out, or if it's the case of FTP, it'll prevent FileZilla from timing out. Now, HTTP is a time-based mechanism, and there's really only one parameter, that's the timeout interval. So basically, let me show you this command that you could do if you were doing, let's say, Kaspersky or, well, you know what, let's do Sophos. Sophos is probably going to be the more robust solution you're going to go to. So let me show you how to set that timeout interval here. So notice the context we're in here. We're in Edit Security UTM Feature Profile Antivirus context. So we drill into this context and we would be setting for the Sophos engine profile, or again, it could also be Kaspersky. And then this is the name of the profile, SOPH-AV, and it's simply trickling timeout. And so we're going to choose 10 seconds here. So what we're saying is every 10 seconds, we're going to send these small fragments of the file back to the client in order to prevent it from timing out. Okay, so antivirus trickling, something that may come up on your exam. Want to make sure you know about that. Now, I did mention for the branch office, for the remote office, the regional office, you might be combining your SRX antivirus UTM feature set with some endpoint security antivirus. So you may want to go check out Sophos since it is a major Juniper partner. They do have a complete security box solution here. We would be focusing, of course, on the endpoint solution. And so you could go up here and look at their different products and look at their endpoint security, and perhaps for your organization you might want to combine the endpoint protection from Sophos, antivirus, application, device control, network admission control, as well as personal firewall services, along with other features. And you can see they've got Sophos Antivirus Business Solution for 100 users or less, and even mobile control, and even Sophos for Microsoft SharePoint, one of my favorite applications, by the way, SharePoint. Maybe check this out as an endpoint solution for your organization, and then think about maybe gravitating away from the Juniper Express solution to the Sophos and the cloud solution, since so many things seem to be moving in that cloud computing direction. That seems to be kind of the buzzword of the day, but it is where we're kind of moving our things. So you might want to take a look at some of the options out there. And you can even see over here they do a comparison of Sophos versus Symantec, McAfee, and Kaspersky. So you might want to take a look at that as well, or even try some of their products for free. All right, there you go. That was the antivirus protection feature of Unified Threat Management. I hope this CBT Nugget was informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.